In this video, we're going to consider some of the adaptations that we have for life in water. Now, this could be considered to be a bit of a topsy-turvy way of looking at things, because most living creatures have ancestry that come from the water, very obviously water-based ancestors. And we, as creatures that are primarily terrestrial, think that it's odd to live in water, whereas it really is the other way around. So the ways in which creatures are adapted to live in water are some of the things that we live with in our ancestry, which have, made things slightly unusual. So when we come to think about adaptations for an aquatic environment, we think of the sorts of things that we don't have, like the ability to extract oxygen from water via gills, and to feed underwater and try not to swallow the water while you're feeding, and the ways of procuring, for swimming and procuring what you're going to eat from an aquatic environment. And also because we're used to life on land, we're thinking in terms of the base of the food chain being plants, large or enormous organisms. Whereas in the water, most of the production, most of the photosynthesis is done by algae, which are microscopic. So the base of the food chain are creatures which filter out the food from the water column. And maybe one of the ones which we can start with are creatures like these goose barnacles. Now, barnacles are a member of the group known as the crustaceans. They've got a hard shell, they've got jointed limbs, but in the barnacles they're kept inside a shell. The shell opens and they waggle their legs around, and that brings currents of water containing their food to them, and then they eat them. Now, barnacles have to protect themselves because they're stuck to rocks. These are goose barnacles, so they've got a stalk. But perhaps the barnacles that you're most familiar with are actually clamped directly onto the rocks themselves. And so there's lots of hazards for living in an aquatic environment. There's lots of change and buffeting, you've got tides and so on. And so one of the problems is how to make sure that you're in the right place to survive and not swept out. So many things have got adaptations for swimming or for keeping themselves locked into the substrate there they don't want to move to. So we have lots of shellfish, mussels and whelks and cockles, and gastropods like this snail. So these are anchored onto the substrate. These cruise around on top of it, and they can hunker down and pull themselves onto the substrate by the suction power of the muscular foot that they move on. And then we've got things like the crabs, again crustaceans like the barnacle, and they have got strong limbs which allow them to move, and spiked ends to the limbs so that they can hunker down and protect themselves from what's going on in the rest of the environment. This is a shore crab, a British crab. There are some crabs, like this velvet swimming crab, which actually spend their time swimming. So if I compare the two of them, you've got normal walking legs at the back here, but here they're modified into paddles, and they actually use them to row through the water. They're much more at home in the open water rather than on the bottom of the sea. And of course, we have the fish like this fossil one, which go back millions of years into the past, the very early stages of animal life. And they propel themselves with a muscular tail and these rows of muscles on the side of the body, which give them that wavy S-shaped motion to get them through the water. So they're adapted to life in an aquatic environment. They extract their oxygen and pass carbon dioxide out of their bodies via a system of gills, which you see in this dissected shark's head, which have been stained blue. The bit in the middle here is the heart. And the heart pumps the blood through to the gills and then onto the body. It's a much simpler system than we have in mammals. And they also reproduce underwater. This is a section through a shark's egg showing the baby shark inside this structure, which is colloquially known as the shepherd's purse. No, it's not shepherd's purse, the mermaid's purse. Shepherd purrs are the products of a land plant. And fish, sometimes, so long as they keep their gills wet, are able to survive. Some of them are obligate, they can't move out of the water. Some, like the lungfish and in fact goldfish, gulp air to supplement the oxygen that's not in the environment. To move on from the fish to the amphibians, this is an example of an axolotl, sometimes sold in pet shops under the name of fish with legs. And they're a type of amphibian, but they're unusual in that the larval stage of the amphibian, the tadpole, has gills with which to breathe, and you can maybe just see them on the outside of the body. So they're the ones that are filtering in oxygen and filtering out carbon dioxide from the bloodstream to keep the animal alive. But the axolotl retains these when it becomes able to reproduce, which is gives it the name of the Peter Pan of the amphibian world. Some of these salamander type amphibians actually don't have lungs, and they use the surface area of their body to respire with. But in most cases, anything that lives in an aquatic environment has gills. So if we were to dissect the squid here, we'd find a paired structures underneath the outer mantle in which water is continually being passed over so that they are getting rid of the waste products and bringing oxygen into their bodies. In freshwater, we don't have many insects. The marine environment is, and I'm going to repeat that in the proper way. In freshwater, we don't have so many crustaceans, but we do have insects, whereas in the marine environment, they are dominated by crustaceans. This is a freshwater one, though, one of the rare ones, which is a crayfish. And they have modified legs on the rear part of the section, which are used to get the gases exchanged. But we also have large numbers of freshwater insects. We don't get them this size in Britain, but these are members of the family that includes aphids, which have piercing mouth parts, and they live in fresh water. This is one which is a water scorpion. It doesn't have gills, but it has this long spike at the back, which looks a bit like a sting, but that's a snorkel which it sticks out of the water. Some larval forms of insects that we know, like dragonflies and damselflies and mayflies, have gills, but those are special adaptations. They go back to the normal insect way of respiring through holes in the side of the body when they emerge onto land and fly off. The recolonisation of water has meant that some animals, like dolphins and ichthyosaurs, have reacquired the shape and the look of fish, because living in water, if you're going to be large, if you're going to power your way through it, you're going to end up looking like a fish. And that's an example of convergence. There's a huge variety of organisms in fresh water, but an even larger variety in the marine environment, because that is where most creatures emerge from.